A rusted police cruiser idled under the pallid street lamp as midnight rain etched ghostly trails along cracked asphalt, mirroring the shattered lives behind closed doors. A vignette captured in a blurred surveillance shot, frozen in time by a witness's trembling phone. In that fraught moment, Mark Donovan, a quiet, unassuming 28-year-old with scars carved by life's relentless disappointments, stood amid the ruins of promises and shattered trust. His world, a modest apartment in a rough-edged urban sprawl, was suddenly transformed into the backdrop of an unfolding nightmare. The case files would later reveal shocking details. His wife, Marianne, with porcelain features and haunted eyes, had been seen leaving the stately townhouse of his father, Richard Donovan, a man whose silvered hair and unsettling charm masked a labyrinth of sins. A series of grainy photos, whispered confidences on taped voicemails, and confessional interviews painted an obscured tableau. A man who once symbolized safety and integrity had, behind closed doors, seduced his daughter-in-law and insidiously manipulated evidence to pin allegations of abuse onto his own flesh and blood. As the documentary voiceover intoned in somber cadence, court documents revealed a sinister collusion that shattered a family. The gravity of the betrayal resonated with the immediacy of a live broadcast. Mark's voice, raw with disbelief during a taped interview with local reporters, faltered as he recounted his confusion over Marianne's fractured apologies and Richard's cryptic reassurances that turned to venom when the truth began to emerge. "I never imagined betrayal could come from the very man who was supposed to protect me," he murmured, his tone layered with both sorrow and a desperate need for redemption. Memories cascaded, a dinner table laden with unspoken hostilities, moments of laughter now punctured by furtive glances, and hushed phone calls echoing in the unforgiving corridors of his mind. Beneath the glistening veneer of suburban normalcy lay a tangled web, spun with calculated malice that now threatened to dismantle the fabric of everything Mark once held dear. Years earlier, when the Donovan family seemed emblematic of hard-won successes amid urban decay, Richard's influence loomed large in the community, a celebrated patriarch with a reputation for community work and unyielding standards. A figure whose endorsements garnered both admiration and envy, Marianne, whose own troubled past had been masked by a determined smile and a yearning for acceptance, found herself ensnared in a series of increasingly charged encounters that blurred the lines of desire and subjugation. Her confessional voice resonated through clandestine conversations, moments of tenderness twisted by dark irony and sinister manipulation. In hushed tones during heated rendezvous, she recalled how Richard's assurances made her feel like a coveted secret, a prized possession in an elite world that seemed to promise escape from the mundane confines of her earlier life. Yet, as layers of seduction peeled away, the revelation of his true intentions emerged in late-night whispers, a meticulously plotted scheme to divert suspicion away from his own sordid indulgences by framing his son for abuse, a heinous tactic designed to silence any challenges to his authority. Marianne's internal monologue, imbued with guilt and resignation, contrasted sharply with the public persona she maintained as a loving wife. The rhythmic patter of rain provided the only soundtrack to her remorseful musings, each droplet echoing the inevitability of reckoning in a life marred by decisions made under duress. The narrative swiftly rewound to the early days of the affair, when clandestine meetings occurred in shadowed corridors of luxurious residences and alleyway diners where whispered promises were made. A reverberating voiceover detailed, "In the midnight hours when truth hides beneath a shroud of deception, every kiss and every lie carries the weight of irreversible consequence." The tension mounted as Marianne's internal struggle, torn between the allure of forbidden intimacy and the fetters of betrayal, became a symbol of a decaying moral order, a dark commentary on a system that valued legacy over truth. As evidence began to mount and the investigation gained momentum, a sequence of disturbing reenactments emerged, like fractured snapshots of a harrowing crime scene. Under the glaring scrutiny of investigative reporters, hushed exchanges between police detectives revealed that the physical evidence did not align with any known pattern of domestic violence. Instead, it seemed meticulously staged. In carefully recorded interviews, Detective Lisa Monroe, a woman whose dedication to uncovering truth was as personal as it was professional, spoke with a measured tone that belied the underlying shock. The forensic anomalies we encountered suggested manipulation at every step. There was no spontaneous act of violence here, only a carefully constructed narrative designed to defame and dismantle a man's life. Her statement, repeated in multiple press briefings, became the haunting refrain that echoed against the backdrop of this tragedy. Quiet murmurs in the corridors of justice and whispered pleas from neighborhood residents painted a picture of a once harmonious family, now stranded in a labyrinth of deceit. The raw, unedited interviews were intercut with archival photos that captured the delicate balance of the family's former unity, a balance that crumbled under the weight of Richard's calculated seduction and subsequent machinations. Legal transcripts, punctuated by terse questions and strained silences, bore witness to the mounting tension inside the courtroom, where every piece of evidence seemed to be a piece of a puzzle too grotesquely assembled to ever fit together. In these moments of judicial reckoning, Mark's fragmented soliloquies of despair and disbelief merged with the stark reality of media frenzy, his narrative co-opted into a spectacle of tragedy and scandal. Beneath the veneer of impassive authority, Richard's true nature began to reveal itself in dark corridors of memory and hidden conversations. His transformation from a revered patriarch to a manipulative architect of ruin was underlined by a series of chilling confessions recorded on his unguarded voicemail, now public and damning. "I did what needed to be done," his voice rasped in a moment of raw vulnerability, as if the act itself were a burden he had long borne. Yet, his calculated emphasis on necessity was a thin veneer for ambition steeped in legacy and power. The confession, ironically interspersed with moments of tender reminiscence about his own troubled upbringing, painted a complex portrait of a man who had internalized a corrosive belief that ends justify the means. Marianne's role in this twisted tableau was equally harrowing, trapped between admiration and revulsion. Her whispered admissions and under-the-breath exchanges evoked both sorrow and complicity. Dialogue between Marianne and a longtime friend, recorded as part of a secret audio clip later surfaced by investigative journalists, captured the essence of her despair. "I knew it was wrong, every instinct screamed against it, but his promises, they lured me like a drug." The shattered soundtrack of her life played out in a series of haunting flashbacks, fragments of meetings in dimly lit lounges, furtive glances exchanged over expensive whiskey, and promises made on the edge of moral collapse. The disjointed recollections interwove with graphic visualizations of court reporters' dramatic reenactments, a narrative that did not simply recount criminal activity but instead exposed the profound emotional void at the center of every betrayal. In the days leading up to the trial, as media scrutiny intensified and social media platforms buzzed with theories and outrage, Mark found himself increasingly isolated by suspicion and derision. His every action was dissected through the unforgiving lens of public judgment, his character reduced to a set of damning allegations that defied logic and empathy. Personal diary entries discovered in the recesses of his modest apartment provided a window into his inner turmoil, a carefully guarded record of a man grappling with grief, anger, and a desperate longing for truth. "I wake each day in a mire of uncertainty," one entry read, "haunted by the betrayal of those I trusted most. The man who raised me, the love I knew, now all seem like cruel illusions." Amid these private reflections, flashbacks of happier times intermingled with the stark reality of his present, creating a mosaic of disillusionment that was both heart-wrenching and raw. Neighbors recalled late-night arguments and the quiet destruction that had become a signature of the Donovan household, a once quiet sanctuary now reverberating with echoes of pain and whispered regrets. As news anchors repeated the scandalous headline, "Father-in-law's sinister plot exposed," Mark's voice resonated in confessional interviews, his tone oscillating between subdued desperation and a muted determination to reclaim his identity. His interactions with close friends, laced with moments of dark irony and bitter laughter, underscored the tragic inevitability of his situation. It's like living in a scripted nightmare where every apology hides a dagger, he confided during one particularly poignant encounter in a hospital waiting room, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The narrative, as relentless as the urban rain, grew ever more intricate with each new revelation. A tapestry of lies, manipulated truths, and irreversible choices that no one, least of all Mark, could ever hope to unravel fully. Even as the wheels of justice began to turn, unseen forces manipulated behind the scenes, ensuring that every emergent piece of evidence served to entrench the already damning narrative against Mark. A clandestine meeting in a smoky back room of a rundown diner marked a turning point. An unanticipated witness stepped forward with testimony that would later upend established facts. In this discreet confession, recorded in the background of a hurried conversation, a once trusted friend of Richard revealed details that hinted at a long-buried secret: the existence of bank transfers and coded messages exchanged between Richard and an unknown intermediary. "It wasn't random," the witness murmured, voice tight with suppressed emotion. "There was always a plan. A plan to deflect blame and destroy everything Mark held dear." This revelation, interwoven with forensic reports and emotionally charged depositions, sent shockwaves through the investigative team. The narrative, dense with irony and grim resolve, was punctuated by the relentless cadence of a city's heartbeat, a metronomic reminder of how life's darkest sins can hide behind the illusion of order and respectability. Detective Monroe's measured observations grew ever more incisive as she linked disparate pieces of evidence into a sinister mosaic, one that inexorably pointed to Richard's hand guiding the chaos from behind a mask of paternal concern. In a whispered voiceover that captured the raw desperation of the scene, she noted, "Every layer peeled back reveals more questions, and no matter how tightly the narrative is spun, the truth demands release from its chain." As the city's neon glow cast long shadows on the pavement, the case spiraled deeper into uncharted territories of corruption and heartbreak, each new twist a testament to the capacity for human deceit, the fragility of trust, and the irrevocable scars left behind when betrayal takes root. The machinations orchestrated by Richard reached a fever pitch as the courtroom transformed into a battleground of competing truths and manipulated evidence. In the sterile confines of the trial chamber, tense silence intermingled with the fervor of impassioned testimony. Prosecutors methodically presented evidence, a series of damning photographs, incriminating voicemail recordings, and twisted diary entries that constructed a narrative of abuse so detailed that the very air grew oppressive with anticipatory dread. Mark sat rigidly in the defendant's box, his gaze fixed on an indistinct point beyond the polished wood, while Marianne's countenance vacillated between contrition and a deep-seated terror that spoke of an inner torment too profound for words. As a witness, with a voice softened by regret, recounted her recollections, "I saw Richard's eyes gleam in a way that no father should ever know. The gravity of the revelations deepened, the collective anxiety that gripped everyone in attendance. Every question posed by the defense seemed to draw an unyielding line through the tapestry of evidence, unraveling any thread of doubt before it could coalesce into hope for exoneration." The prosecuting attorney's pointed inquiries, interspersed with emotionally charged asides, unraveled the carefully constructed facade of the Donovan family, exposing fissures that hinted at a lifetime of suppressed resentments and moral decay. "This is not merely a case of familial strife," he declared, voice resonating across the courtroom as if delivering a judgment upon society itself, "but a deliberate orchestration of betrayal, an act so calculated that it undermines the very sanctity of trust." Each word, like a verdict in itself, drove home the inescapable conclusion: innocence had been hijacked by treachery, and the true perpetrators hid behind masks too familiar to recognize. As murmurs filled the room and the tension escalated into palpable agony, Mark's inner voice, quiet yet insistent, questioned the very foundation of his existence, the echoes of his past triumphs now tainted by the malignant truth of his present. In that charged moment, every whispered testimony, every tearful confession, and every manipulated piece of evidence coalesced into a haunting refrain: that neither time nor truth could easily erase. In the dim light of a hospital corridor where the sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with the bitter tang of despair, Marianne found herself alone with her conscience. The weight of her complicity and the crushing burden of guilt mingled with a desperate search for absolution. With trembling fingers, she leafed through old photographs and battered letters, a visual diary of happier, simpler times. And in each faded snapshot, she desperately sought an explanation for how an ordinary life had unraveled into a cacophony of lies and darkness. The memory of Richard's seductive charm, so meticulously engineered to dismantle her will and bind her to a fate she never imagined, played on an endless loop in her mind. "I was entranced by a man who promised redemption," she confided, voice barely above a whisper during a private conversation recorded in seclusion, only to find that my every promise was a chain that fastened me to ruin. Every word trembled with sorrow and regret as she recounted secret meetings held in parking lots under a veil of rain, the soft hum of a city in turmoil, and moments when his persuasive assurances masked the inherent danger behind his carefully chosen phrases. Marian's internal narrative was one of relentless self-reproach, each recollection a reminder of how her choice had inadvertently paved the way for her husband's downfall. In quiet moments of reflection, she envisioned a different life, a life free of manipulation, where trust was not a currency traded on the back of ancient grudges and hidden ambitions. Yet the courtroom proceedings, the media's unyielding glare, and the relentless pursuit of truth kept her tethered to a grim reality. As detectives and forensic experts meticulously pieced together evidence, Marianne found herself facing not just external prosecution, but an internal reckoning that threatened to shatter her from within. The blurred lines between victim and accomplice dissolved into an overwhelming sense of isolation, each heartbeat a dirge echoing through the corridors of memory, each breath a painful reminder that some sins, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of clawing their way back to light. The final days of the trial unfurled like the slow, inexorable turning of a tide, carrying with it revelations that fractured every remaining semblance of certainty. In an electrified courtroom where anticipation and dread battled in the charged air, an unexpected piece of evidence emerged, a hidden security footage recovered from a long-forgotten cloud server that captured a crucial moment between Marianne and Richard. The grainy video, intercut with intermittent frames of raw emotion and calculated deception, served as a silent testament to the convoluted alliance between seduction and premeditation. In a hushed voiceover, a narrator recounted, "In the unlikeliest of moments, truth reveals itself in a single frame, a whispered secret that shatters a lifetime of carefully constructed lies." The footage revealed Richard's subtle coercion, his eyes glinting with a cold, predatory light as he guided Marianne through an encounter steeped in both tenderness and treachery. As the video played repeatedly, courtroom murmurs swelled into a cacophony of shocked exclamations and anguished protests. Mark's expression, a haunting mix of pain, disbelief, and a dawning realization of betrayal, was captured in every pulse and pause of the recording. An elderly juror, his voice choked with emotion, whispered to a neighbor, "I cannot believe what we're witnessing." A boy betrayed by the man meant to be his guiding light. Every whispered word, every trembling tear testified to the collapse of a facade that had, until that moment, obscured a grim truth. The trial, once a stage for preordained narratives, now became a battleground for conflicting emotions and the relentless pursuit of justice. As final arguments echoed off the stark walls and jurors deliberated in near silence, the underlying message was painfully clear. The real crime was not an isolated act of violence, but the systematic dismantling of a man's dignity through deceit orchestrated by those who should have been his protectors. In that solemn chamber, time itself seemed to pause, a relentless observer to the tragic unraveling of a family and the irreversible consequences of a betrayal that would echo through generations. In the bitter aftermath of the trial, as society's collective gaze slowly shifted from the spectacle of scandal to the quiet, enduring pain of those left behind, the city itself became a silent character in a drama that few could escape unscathed. Mark, now a broken figure wandering the remnants of his once solid life, retreated into the obscurity of a lonely apartment that seemed to absorb his anguish like a sponge. The media, relentless in their pursuit of sensationalism, churned out headlines that oscillated between invective and empathy, each article a further crack in the fragile armor of his identity. Yet amid the public furor and the relentless cycle of televised rehashes, a more intimate reckoning persisted. Friends who had once shared his laughter now whispered in hushed tones about the tragic fall of a man who had inadvertently become a pawn in a far larger, more insidious game. In quiet cafes and dimly lit bars, fragmented conversations recounted the details of the scandal, with a mix of morbid fascination and genuine sorrow. He's not the monster they say he is, one voice insisted, tinged with regret. He's a man manipulated by forces he could never hope to understand. These voices, though few, provided a counterpoint to the dominant narrative of guilt and victimhood, suggesting that within the labyrinth of deception, there lay nuances that defied simple categorization. Meanwhile, Marianne disappeared into the anonymity of a far-off town, her departure as sudden as it was inevitable, a ghost retreating from a life that had betrayed its promise at every turn. Her parting words, captured in a final tear-streaked voicemail, lingered as an elegy to lost innocence and the crushing burden of secrets. "I am sorry," she repeated over and over, until the recording itself seemed to weep with the weight of her remorse. In the solitude of his new existence, Mark slowly began to reassemble the shattered fragments of his life, one painful memory at a time. He found solace, if only fleeting, in writing, a series of raw, unedited reflections that detailed not just the external betrayals he had suffered, but the internal collapse of trust that had once defined him. Each word on the page was both a confession and a cautious prayer for redemption, a hope that someday, in the quiet aftermath of pain, truth might find a way to heal even the deepest wounds. And so, as the final days of the trial faded into an enduring scar on the collective consciousness of the city, Mark's story endured as a cautionary tale, a narrative woven with threads of despair, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of a justice that, though delayed, ultimately could not be denied. In that bittersweet aftermath, beneath a sky heavy with unanswered questions and the memory of sins committed in the silence of midnight rain, the urban landscape bore witness to a truth as complex as it was devastating. Sometimes, the greatest betrayal comes not from an enemy, but from the very hands that were meant to guide us through life's darkest hours.